I do have a beef with Nick Fuentes. What that beef is depends a little bit on what is motivating him, which I don't think I fully understand yet. My beef with him is that many of the things that he says are, even if he himself is being ironic or transgressing for its own purpose, the tropes that he is playing with are so dangerous that I think he has a responsibility to stay away from them. And even if I embrace his instinct to transgress, there are certain places that you mustn't go because of fundamental defects of humanity and what may obtain if he legitimizes those perspectives, even if it's not his intent.
What's up, guys? Today we are going to review a clip by Bret Weinstein speaking with Carl Benjamin, and they're going to be discussing Nicholas Fuentes, our boy, Nicky Fountains, and they're going to be talking about his interview with Piers Morgan, among other things. To be clear, the opening segment of this video was Carl and Bret essentially just kind of circle jerking each other for being anti-censorship during the pandemic. And kudos for that. But we've already heard just from that opening segment that Bret is more interested in how he can stop others from hearing what it is that Nick is discussing rather than having a conversation about that himself. He's put down some pretty hard boundaries already, and I think we're going to see more of that as we go along. We'll see how Carl responds in turn.
You had people openly discussing a complete revision of the collective understanding of Hitler, the Holocaust, World War II, etc. And I was spooked by it. I did a podcast where I tried to alert people that this is happening, and you're probably not seeing it if the algorithm doesn't think you'll like it. But it's happening, and it's not a tiny number of people, and you need to know it's there. But in that episode, something caused me to start seeing Nick Fuentes show up, and I found him fascinating because he is charismatic, he's insightful, and he obviously was saying a great many things that are unspeakable in polite society, many of which are grotesque, but some of which are simply things that need to be said and are not being discussed anywhere. So I have deeply mixed feelings about what I see there, but I know that it's a mistake to simply see the inflammatory clips and assume that that's what's going on. It really isn't. And so you put out a piece, maybe it was yesterday or the day before, in which you analyzed the Nick Fuentes phenomenon, which is to say not just who is this person and why is he saying these things, but why is it resonating so broadly amongst Zoomers? And I thought your piece was excellent. So I wanted to have you on to articulate your position and for you and me to talk about what we agree about, maybe what we disagree about.
I know the area of Twitter you're talking about, and I just want to be clear about what my position on all of this is. I personally have got no interest or desire for any kind of Holocaust revisionism, any kind of Holocaust denial. I've absolutely got no sympathy with Nazi Germany or anything like that. As far as I'm concerned, I'm an Englishman. My side with the British during World War II. My ideology is I don't really consider myself to hold an ideology. I just tried to make sure that I'm being driven literally in a sensible manner, as in through the sense datum and through reasonable analysis of what I see. So I am not in any way sympathetic to the ideology they're constructing in that area of Twitter. But like you, I think it's important to understand what is happening and why. And what I've found, I've finished a degree and a master's degree in philosophy. And a lot of people ask me, why did you do philosophy? And honestly, the ability to untangle layers is the real reason. Because you'll notice that people treat Nick Fuentes in the ideological layer. And in the ideological layer, the things he says are so offensive to the standard ideology of almost everyone in the West, on the left or the right, conservative or liberal. It's understood that, of course, we're the good guys in World War II, the bad guys were defeated, and we all lived happily ever after. And so when Nick Fuentes says things like Hitler is cool, he is attacking on the ideological layer all of the sacred cows of the post-World War II consensus. He is turning the entire thing on its head and saying, well, this is the problem, is that basically the West doesn't think Hitler is cool. And this is heresy. This is just an outright heresy to this ideological level of belief. But then if you actually think about what you're looking at, well, Nick Fuentes, and I'm just to be clear, I haven't got any personal beef with the man, or I don't personally dislike him even. Like you, I've seen the clips going around, and I agree with your assessment. He's lucid, he's funny, he's sharp-witted, and he's a very clear communicator, very good communicator. So you can see why, to an audience of dispossessed young men, you can see why he would be a very appealing figure. But if you actually look at him, he's not terribly physically impressive. He is not a titanic speaker like Adolf Hitler or anything like this. What he is a young man with a microphone who is prepared to transgress boundaries in order to make a point, in order to make himself heard. And so the ideological layer is the layer everyone engages with him on. But I've noticed that, I mean, I don't know about yourself, I'm a father, and I've got a few other content creator friends who are also fathers. And we couldn't help but watch his interview with Piers Morgan through the lens of parents listening to rebellious children. And the rebellious children were really attacking the established worldview of the parents, because I think what was really underlying it is the message that actually the old worldview of the Piers Morgan types just doesn't work for the world in which these young men live. And I think the most important part of the whole thing was actually when Nick Fuentes says, yes, I am a racist. And I think that a lot of people failed to understand what that really means and why that is something that actually resonates with a lot of people. Now, Piers Morgan, in particular, grew up in an England that was 95+% white English. So everywhere you went, it was just English people all over the place. And you would have to go and look for those small areas of England, in not even cities, just in parts of cities that had a significant density of non-English people in them. And so when you have that kind of background stability, obviously being a racist seems like a horrible and malicious thing that is irrational, is completely irrational to say, well, hang on a second, why would you be mean to the chap who runs the Chinese restaurant or something like that? He's not doing anything wrong. What would be the reason other than your own personal hatred, which obviously is completely true and makes sense. But I think a lot of the Zoomer men now are living in countries that are actually highly diversified. They don't have, and America was very much the same in this sort of era, like much, much higher percentage white American of European descent. And that it makes a lot more sense when that kind of background assumption obtains. But when it doesn't, and you're thrown into a world where you've got lots of different competing groups that are all expected to occupy the same space, then I think Fuentes is probably more correct than not when he says, well, everyone is racist. Because what he means is all of these different groups are demonstrating an in-group preference towards themselves. And as the young white men, well, they're looking around and saying, well, okay, well, do we have an in-group that we can have a preference for? Because everyone else seems to be getting ahead on this understanding. And if we're denied that, that makes us vulnerable in the world that the Piers Morgans of the world have created. And so I think this is a genuine shift that is not going to go away, whether we like it or not.
So Carl kind of gets going about how there's certain views that are heretical to take about world history. And plain and simple, that's just not true. You can think whatever you want about history. And when you speak in the language of heresy, you are immediately stepping away from the world of datum and fact and logic, and you're moving into the world of a faith-based approach, a religious approach, which I think is why he also used words such as sacred cows. So that's not off limits at all, not one bit. He also kind of reduces Nick to a one-dimensional archetype. You know, he refers to him as basically a child, says that he's looking at him as a father looks at a child. He tries to take the validity of Nick's perspectives away by reframing them as just merely youthful rebellion. And that's an ad hominem attack entirely, just as it's an ad hominem attack to talk about whether or not he's a good speaker, whether or not he has strong physical stature. Like, none of that's important. And all of this is avoiding discussing about the content of Nick's ideologies, and they're very open about saying you're not allowed to discuss that. It's heretical to discuss that. And that is the reason itself why people flock to Nick Fuentes, is because they can tell that people are pretending to use logic to discuss history, but they're really using faith. And they could tell that people are saying, hey, you have to think what we want you to think, which immediately triggers the human brain to be like, whoa, what are you trying to hide? So that's the real reason why people are flocking to Nick. It's that simple. And, you know, these guys will, like everyone else, do everything but discuss that actual reason. Underneath their words, for whatever reasons, the true intent of their behavior is to signal compliance to the authority of the current paradigm. Rightfully so. They got a lot to lose if they go against the grain. And if you want to see just what happens when you go against the grain, go ahead and look at figures like Nick Fuentes and what happened to him. Go ahead and look at, even worse, go look at David Irving. See what happened. Check out the story of David Irving if you really want to know what happens if you threaten the authority of this narrative. Do me a favor, write a comment below and let me know. I mean, am I off my rocker? Is it more important to subscribe to the paradigms of authority and power than it is to simply respect the free will of individuals and allow people to develop their own thoughts and beliefs and values? Drop a comment below. Tell me what's up.
Well, I resonate with a lot of what you said. I want to go back and just put my own perspective on the table here in a couple places. I do have a beef with Nick Fuentes. What that beef is depends a little bit on what is motivating him, which I don't think I fully understand yet. My beef with him is that many of the things that he says are, even if he himself is being ironic or transgressing for its own purpose, the tropes that he is playing with are so dangerous that I think he has a responsibility to stay away from them. And even if I embrace his instinct to transgress, there are certain places that you mustn't go because of fundamental defects of humanity and what may obtain if he legitimizes those perspectives, even if it's not his intent. So my beef with him is that he has a responsibility. On the other hand, he's 27 years old. And I remember being that age. And I have two kids, boys, one 21, one 19. And I recognize in them the tendency to transgress. And so what I'm hoping is that he is being ironic and that he actually can be brought to an understanding of the dangers of some of the territories in which he is playing. But I don't know. That remains to be seen. As for the issue of racism, I suspect you and I will land in about the same place. I still am a liberal. I absolutely believe in a formally colorblind West.
Nice. And that's a valiant idea. And so I would suggest we actually start with a formally colorblind land in the Levant. Let's go to that area of the West first. And then just to make sure that we get this right, before we actually implement this formally colorblind system in the West, let's make sure we hit up Africa first. Let's make sure we hit up South America first and Asia first. It's when you hear that perspective and you hear who is saying it and where it is that they're saying it about, that's when Nick Fuentes really starts to resonate with you.
I don't think we should be policing what people say and think. We should be persuading, correcting them when they say things that are wrong. But the maddening situation that Gen Z finds itself in, especially Gen Z straight white males is that they have had their hands tied behind their backs, right? You people have a position of privilege and you must be constrained. And everybody else has been freed to engage in all kinds of things, including rampant racism of exactly the sort that boiled over at Evergreen. And so we have a double standard. The double standard is we are going to enable your racism if you come from some group that we consider downtrodden, and we are going to prosecute every offense, no matter how minor or even if it's just imagined, if you happen to come from a group that is privileged. And so Gen Z, straight white males, are facing demonization for their privilege as they are experiencing no privilege at all. In fact, the opposite, right? They have been constrained. Others have been liberated, and they're being told that their situation is so good that their disadvantage is necessary to level a playing field that's already slanted against them. Is that fair from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I think that's perfectly fair. And I think a large part of the position of the Zoomers at this point is, I think a lot of them feel betrayed, frankly, by the promises liberals have made and then the actions and world that they've brought about. There was no colorblind meritocracy for them. For them, there was a very color conscious and, how to put it, hierarchical world in which they were born. And they were specifically and deliberately put at the bottom of it through no fault of their own. And I'm in many ways I consider myself to be a post-liberal at this point because I've done too much philosophical work on liberalism to be able to adhere to it. But I think I'm most interested in fairness now. I think I'm most interested in it, rather than any kind of abstract set of ideologies, is what people feel to be fair. And I think that we can all agree that the young men of today are not being treated fairly. They are the product of the sort of feminist civilization that we were calling attention to back in the 2000s. Well, we're now more than a decade on from that civilization and its works. And, well, what do we have? We have a very large cohort of very radical young men who have decided that this civilization is there to destroy them or to harm them or to treat them as a servant class. And they'd rather tear it down. And so the question is, well, what do we do from this point onwards? Because in many ways they have a really legitimate point, which is against people of our age and older. And that's, why did you let them do this to us? You, the older generations, have a responsibility in a kind of Burkean sense on the great chain of being to make sure that the world that you're bringing into existence for younger people to grow up in is a good and fair one. And we didn't. And I don't think, I mean, that's our fault, obviously, but it wasn't. It's only in hindsight this becomes exceedingly obvious, because at the time, I think everyone was very blindsided by the highly sophisticated ideological weapons of social justice. And people didn't really know how to actually combat it. It's taken us a long time to play catch up. But that doesn't change the failure on our part, and it doesn't salve any of the wounds that the Zoomers currently carry. And so it really, I think, is actually forcing the question of what is it that they are owed by society, actually? What are the young men of the West actually owed in comparison to all of the minority groups that have been privileged above them? And the answers can get quite reactionary, actually, whether you like them or not. There is a kind of logical implication in a lot of it that suggests actually these men should have been incorporated into the power structures, into the hierarchies, not just for themselves either, but actually for everyone else. Jordan Peterson makes this point quite regularly, or used to before he fell ill, obviously, that the kind of men that women want to marry are not men who earn less than they do. And so, great point. Well, why do women make up the majority of people in universities? Why are women being fast-tracked into the upper echelons of businesses then? This is, it might be immediately gratifying, but in the long run, when polled, even women will say, well, I'd rather if the man earned more money than me, and so I could eventually have children and take care of them while he provides. And I don't want to say, right, okay, so we need some sort of a hard right-wing world or anything, but there is a kind of natural order here that the feminist paradigm attacked, that the Zoomers are really just making actually quite a reasonable request is, could we just live naturally, please? Now, I think they're not articulating this very well, but I think in their defense, people probably wouldn't have listened if it wasn't for some reactionary and very transgressive figurehead grabbing the attention. If they were asking very politely, and they may well have been asking very politely for a long time, nobody listened.
Well, I'm going to correct one thing that you said.
Go ahead.
You said we.
Well, fair.
Right? And the fact is, I believe that you can kind of divide. You've got the transgressive for its own sake stuff. Let's put that aside. And then you've got the critique of the way Western civilization is being run, which I think is incisive. But it comes in two parts. There's the what have you done to us, in which there are many devastating points to be made that are now being made because somebody has decided to just pay the price of saying them and let the chips fall where they may. And then there's the question of what to be done about it, where I don't find them incisive. And in fact, in your piece, you call this out specifically. But with respect to the question of we, I feel no responsibility whatsoever for what has happened to these people because I fought it, as did you. And my feeling is this is the point where the people who fucked this up need to step aside.
And Jewish donors, they have a lot of explaining to do, a lot of decoupling to do, because Jewish donors have been the number one funding mechanism of radical, open border, neoliberal, quasi-Marxist policies, cultural institutions, and nonprofits. This is a beast created by secular Jews. And now it's coming for Jews, and they're like, what on earth happened? And it's not just the colleges. It's the nonprofits, it's the movies, it's Hollywood, it's all of it. It's like time for you guys to wake up and say no more, draw a line in the sand. I don't care if you hate me.
Now, my final takeaway from these clips is that I really agree kind of symptomatically, superficially, with a lot of what both Carl Benjamin and Bret Weinstein are saying. We agree with the superficial aspects of what's going on with society, how the diminishment of the role of men and just simple traditional values are leading to demographic collapse. Even though they didn't say that explicitly, I think we would likely converge on that. However, we disagree deeply in terms of censorship as well as root cause. I believe that the very structure of censorship should be eliminated. The idea that you could fight against that structure of censorship and now you would stand by that structure of censorship simply because the content has changed, that's where I diverge. If anything, I would leave you with this final consideration for the issues that Bret and Carl raise. I would say look into the Frankfurt School and look into Magnus Hirschfeld and see where these ideas came from in the first place. And perhaps then you'll be able to wrap your head around why no in-group is sacrosanct when it comes to criticism. No in-group is sacrosanct when it comes to shining a light on their behavior and seeing if they are living by the same principles that they're trying to force upon others. That being said, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Until the next time, keep your head on a swivel, my friends.